Welcome to Redefining Real Estate. I'm Rylan.
And I'm Morgan. Expect a mix of education, humor, and authentic conversation as we explore all things real estate.
Let's jump into today's episode.
Okay, today we are going to talk about the top mistakes to avoid when you are looking into buying a home. Rylan put this poll on his Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and this is a topic that you guys were most interested in hearing about. So we have 5 different mistakes that we're going to go over today. The first one being around different deadlines in the process. So, Rylan, in your experience, how have your clients dealt with the different deadlines? How have they been something that they needed to be educated on before they actually get into the transaction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely some big deadlines in there. Whenever you're first going under contract, can be an emotional time for sure. So, always hammering on the earnest money and option fee, of course. I mean, that's due within the first 3 days. So it's kind of sometimes it feels fast, sometimes it's a little bit different. But typically, 1% of the sales price, and then $100 for the option fee. Definitely something to set proper expectations on, because that's kind of when it feels real. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, you're looking at homes, everything's kind of hypothetical,
Right.
And then you go into contract and say, all right, well, we're going to need $3,000. It's like, okay, now everything's starting, like we're happening, it's going, and everything's speeding up fast. So definitely a big thing to be prepared for, and if you're not, it can be very scary. If you don't know that money is going to be expected that soon, within those first 3 days, and maybe you don't have $3,000 to just write a check for, I mean, that can be terrifying. So definitely something that I always try to set very clear and proper expectations on. But I mean, I'm sure you do the exact same thing, but what's your experience with that?
Yes, I do the same thing. So like you mentioned, within 3 days after we get a contract signed by the buyers and the sellers in agreement, they have to pay the earnest money, which is usually 1% of the sales price that you mentioned. So if they're looking at a $300,000 house, that's $3,000.
Right.
And that money, even though it's refundable to them at closing, like they're going to get it back, people do feel very nervous about
For sure.
putting down that money up front. But it's to show the sellers that you have some skin in the game, and that you're going to be dedicated to following through on this transaction, as there are multiple different ways in the contract that if you don't abide by it, you will lose that money.
For sure.
And that's part of our job, is to make sure our buyers do not lose that money. With the option fee, yeah, same thing, $100 that pays for their option period, that usually 7-day due diligence period, which I know we talked a lot more in depth about all of this in our home buying process video.
Yes.
An episode that we did earlier this year. So if anybody is more interested in learning about the details of the process, definitely go back and listen to that episode. But yes, that is another big one as well, because people don't understand how it works.
Right.
And just making sure that they're prepared once we submit the offer to have that money on hand, or talk with their family members that may be assisting them with that initial payment.
Yeah, for sure. I had a client a little while back when I was kind of first getting my feet underneath me, and we were in day 2 of our option, so he hadn't turned in his earnest money quite yet. And we did inspections, and he was excited, and then he wanted to, I guess, back out of the deal just because he had some personal things going on. Nothing too crazy, but he hadn't put his deposit in. He didn't have his 1% or the $100, and he wanted to terminate. I was like, that's great, we can do that, but you have to go deposit this. And he's like, well, I don't want to give them money if I want to terminate. So that was definitely most likely my fault on that. I should have set a lot better expectations, up front prior to going into contract. Definitely a big learning moment for me, but we ended up terminating, and he made the deposit after I explained it more thoroughly, and he was a lot more comfortable with that. But yeah, he definitely ran into that, and we just kind of had to get him out of there,
Right.
So definitely kind of something on me, but huge learning experience. So I mean, ever since then, it's been a very big thing I've worked on for sure.
Well, I think that sometimes we assume, because of people's age or what they tell us about their experience, that they know some of these things, which is why we wanted to go over it, because there's a misconception from a lot of people that maybe you bought, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or you've seen your friends and family purchase, and you think that you may know the process. But there's a lot of different pieces of it that come together. So that is the first mistake that we want to avoid, is just not being prepared for those deadlines.
For sure.
The second thing is another big topic that we've talked about before, which is this idea of inspections and what happens during inspections.
For sure.
So what has your experience been when your clients have gone through it? What things do they need to avoid, or what things do they need to expect?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely a very emotional time when it's early on in the transaction. There's a lot going on. It feels very fast paced, and you are very nervous that the house is either going to pass or fail. Right? That's always the big thing. So we definitely try to set clear expectations that it's not necessarily a pass or fail scenario. It's more of just understanding what it is that you're purchasing, like what all is going on with the home. So trying to set that as a very clear expectation is something that's very important to me. But yeah, I mean, I've had some emotional people. I've had people that are just like, is it good or bad, or what's kind of going on? I think that's going to be anyone's experience, really, but nothing too crazy. But what about you?
I would say the same. With inspections, you do have different types of people who want to know every single detail about what came back in the report. Others are more like, tell me the big priorities. And I think that being able to identify which one of those that you are is something that's going to be really important during this process. Because if you can communicate that to your agent early on, or at least express that that's very important to you, I think that will make everyone's experience a lot better and a lot easier. Just because obviously if someone is very detail oriented and they want to know everything in the report, they want to understand every repair that they may end up wanting to make, then that is a lot different conversation that you would have with your realtor or your inspector versus someone who's maybe buying an investment property and they're like, well, what do I need to address just to have it ready for move-in for tenants, right? So that is the big thing, expectations, and just making sure that you prepare yourself for the emotional roller coaster that you're, maybe about to endure. Because when you first go under contract, you have these rose-colored glasses on, you love the home, you're envisioning yourself in it, then you find out, oh, there's all these things that I may or may not want to address. But like I said, we did do another episode on that again earlier this year. So if you want to know all the details about what to expect during inspections, go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah.
So what about representation? I know that's another one that people are still kind of confused about here and there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being prepared to have your own representation is a big one. I think a lot of people just think that, like, if the realtor that's selling it, they can help them buy it, I think that's obviously it's your decision, but I think it would be smart to have your own representation of the transaction, because at the end of the day, you want someone that has your best interest in mind, and not necessarily an agent that already has a prior agreement to other, clients, if you will. But I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, in my experience, what I found is there are two different types of people. The ones that do all this research and maybe they already have a realtor in mind or a relationship with someone that they want to use, and so they will reach out to that person because they know and trust them already. But then there's this other person that maybe you don't know anybody in the area, you don't trust anyone yet, so you're just looking at houses online, or maybe you're going to open houses, you're talking to the listing agents, and they seem nice, they seem like they could help you figure out what you need to do, but people need to understand that in Texas it is illegal to have one agent representing both parties. That's called dual agency. So that is not allowed in Texas. So if you are talking to a listing agent, always understand that they are not representing you, they are representing the seller.
Yes.
So in a situation where you don't have representation, is it possible that an agent may be, again, friendly to you, amicable, try to get the deal done? Sure. But unless you're doing real estate every day or every week, like you're a seasoned investor, then you're not going to know what the norms are in the market. You're not going to know what buyers are able to get in that market right now, in that specific moment that you're making offers. And a lot of times I just feel like people in the past have told me that they regretted not having representation because they didn't know what they didn't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're not in the industry every single day and like learning and being involved in it, like you mentioned. So it's definitely crucial to be with an expert that is.
Absolutely. And another one that I think along those same lines about kind of just the expectations of this whole process, that makes me think of what we call like finding your catalyst home,
Right.
which is finding the home that really makes you make a decision, right? Like, oh, I really like this one. I really believe I can see myself in it.
Yeah.
Once you find that catalyst home, then any other house that you look at, you can compare it to that one.
For sure.
Versus looking at 10 homes online and you're like, oh, I like all these houses. I don't really know. Even I can rate them on a scale, but how do I know how to make this decision?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people are just like, when you ask them, like, what reasoning do these all go together? Like, why do you like all of these? A lot of people just are like, oh, I like it. You know, they don't really have a super clear definition on why. And I think finding a catalyst home is a huge thing for sure. Because if you can, like, track why you like homes, I think you're much more likely to come to a decision.
I agree, and I think it's also easier to take, say, one house and say, this is my number one, and then compare every other house you see to that one versus trying to say, well, I kind of liked, 1, 2, and 3, but I don't really know how they all stack up together. It's just easier to compare to one item,
For sure.
when you're looking at houses.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's way too many options out there. You know, there's a lot of homes, and it's very hard to narrow it down. So, I mean, that strategy definitely helps.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I was just showing some houses this past weekend, and my client has 2 different types of properties that she's considering because she's on the cusp of retirement, and so she's thinking, well, I don't want to rent. She just moved back to the area, and she's been renting.
Yeah.
So I don't want to rent long term. I'm thinking I want to buy, at least stay in a place for maybe a year or two, and then when I officially retire, either purchase another property and turn the one I just bought into an investment, or purchase the long-term retirement plan house now. And so we've been looking at different properties, newer homes in College Station versus older homes in Bryan. We've just been kind of all over the place looking.
Yeah.
And it's hard to identify which one is going to meet her needs because we haven't even really found a catalyst home to compare all of these to.
Yeah.
Just because there are, different types of categories of homes, townhomes and condos versus single family and, different ages and different lot sizes. It's just a lot of information for one person to take on.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, she has a pretty unique scenario for sure. And with 2 different options, it's like you're trying to weigh the pros and cons of both at the same time, So definitely a lot to take in for sure.
Yes. And then our last mistake that we often find people do not take into consideration is just doing budgeting for your new house. Yes. So whether you're a first-time home buyer or maybe you're looking to upsize into a larger home or a nicer home or downsize into something else, usually what we find is that a lot of times we're looking at numbers online, we're not talking to a mortgage lender, which can be really detrimental to when you actually understand what your expectations should be, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Understanding a proper budget prior to actually having to have the budget, like prior to actually buying the home and being on the mortgage and all that stuff, understanding your budget and putting that into practice up front. I mean, that'll set yourself up tremendously for the entire process of home buying, just because you'll already be used to doing what you're doing. There's not going to be a huge amount of change other than you're going to be living somewhere else, in a home that you actually enjoy and are proud of. So yeah, I think that's huge for sure.
Right. And so what that would look like in practice is, say you're paying $1,000 a month in rent right now, and then you talk with a mortgage lender, a mortgage professional, and you get qualified for a purchase price where your monthly payment is going to be $2,000 a month. So you have $1,000 a month difference between what you pay now and what you may pay in the future. My recommendation is to take those numbers and go ahead and start allocating that $1,000 extra a month to your savings account. Like, start putting yourself in the mindset of what it would be like to have that monthly payment. That way you can understand truly how it affects the rest of your budget and how constrained you might be, or how much you might still have freedom within the constraints of the rest of your budget.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt.
So I think those are going to be the top 5 mistakes that we can think of. But if you guys have any other questions or any other topics that you want us to discuss, feel free to reach out to us. Our social media accounts will be linked down below, and we will see you on our next episode.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We hope you found something useful or at least had a good time listening.
Yeah, if you enjoy this episode, feel free to subscribe or share it with someone who might enjoy this content.
And if you have any questions or topics you want us to cover, reach out to us on Instagram. Everything will be linked below for you.